So now that we've got our bag all turned and bagged out, we get to move on to the last little finishing touches. So this video is going to have 2 of them, and the last video will have the other 2. We're going to start out by slip stitching closed our lining. Now this should be made easier by the fact that we already pressed this seam. As you can see, mine is maintaining where it was pressed, and so I'm just going to slip some pins into it, and we're going to be using our slip stitch, which is one we learned for our hand stitching tutorials. This is a little bit of a different version from it though, because we've got 2 tunnels instead of just 1 and a flat piece. So this, I've heard this variation called the ladder stitch, but it's also still just the slip stitch. And it's actually the slip stitch version I find more often in the world than the one we did in our sampler, because we're going back and forth between 2 tunnels, which happens a lot when you're closing up lining, as in this case. So for this, you're going to need a needle that's threaded, single threaded, and your bag. So to start out, I'm working from right to left because I'm right-handed. I'm going to insert my needle in one of the tunnels, pull it out, and there we go, get my thread all lined up. And then without moving forward, I'm going to cross over to the other tunnel. I'm gonna actually clip this little thread so it's out of the way. And then I'm going to pull this through as well, and making sure it doesn't get caught on my pins. And we don't want to be doing this too tight, because then it will unintentionally gather our lining fabric and make it really bunchy, which is not the goal. And so I'm going directly over, across. And this one might be a little bit harder just using some of the sample ones because my fabric is a little busier, just color-wise. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you. Yeah, there we go. So my thread's coming out of the one side, so I'm going over to the other side, crossing over, pulling my thread through. I'm moving forward probably about between an eighth and a quarter of an inch forward each time. So these aren't micro stitches, because I don't want it to take forever, but I also don't want them to be so large that things are going to slip through, because even though it's called the slip stitch, that's not the goal. And you'll notice I'm not moving forward unless I'm in a tunnel. I'm only moving side to side when I'm outside of the tunnels. This will make your stitch as invisible as possible, which is the goal. I also find that holding my fabric like kind of pinched like this is really helpful, because it keeps everything angled exactly how I want it. It makes things easy to see and also easy to reach. And luckily, 5 inches of this is not all that long. It'll be done in no time. And if you're having trouble with this video, because I know it is a little more difficult to see hand sewing than it is to see some of the other things I've got going on usually, I'm more than happy to answer questions or give you like a live demo of what this would look like on a sample piece. I found in the costume shop a lot of the times, projects do sort of follow a hand stitching sandwich format, where you start out your project with a lot of like hand thread tracing, things like that, and then you do a bunch of machine stitching. That's the meat in your sandwich, and then you go back to hand stitching at the end to do little finishings like this. When we add our button on, that's gonna be another hand stitching thing, because there are some things that sewing machines just can't do. Okay, and I'm just about done with this one. And I'm gonna go back and be like, making sure everything appears to be holding. It does. It looks like it's holding really well, and you'll notice it is essentially invisible when it's down at the bottom of my bag. No one's ever gonna notice that there is 5 inches of slip stitching. Like, if that would never happen, it just wouldn't. But if it did, you could say, yeah, and that it's good slip stitching. It looks great. To which the person who has their head in your bag for some reason would probably have no reply. They would be speechless. They'd be in absolute awe of your slip stitching abilities and also of your quick and witty comebacks. It's funny, I listen to you guys playing these videos back, and I'm like, man, when did I say those things? And I can tell you, that's gonna be one of those things. You're like, oh, forget about those quick and witty comebacks. I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh God. I'm just doing what I do. I'm just sewing and talking. Okay, so I tied off my slip stitching and clipped the end off, and so now I've got a really nice invisible seam there that matches the rest of what I've got going on down here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next step, but like I said, if you got any questions about slip stitching on the bottom, let me know.